rain starting to move in from the North Sea, and that will reach parts of the Midlands by dawn, and it's going to be dreary and damp in these areas. Southwest England, similar conditions, but for the west and north of Wales, perhaps some brightness coming through. Likewise for the far north of Northern Ireland, but otherwise Northern Ireland's mostly cloudy. The cloud beginning to spill into southern Scotland as well. But elsewhere across Scotland, where we do have the clear skies overnight, it's going to be a chilly start to the day, and in some spots, once again, temperatures will struggle above zero throughout daylight hours. Some patchy fog persisting in places as well, but the gloomiest skies, I suspect, by now will be across much of England into East Wales as well, with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. 8 to 10 Celsius in the south, a little milder compared with the recent days, but staying cold for parts of Scotland. Now, by Friday morning, the low cloud in the south and east will be spilling its way into southern Scotland as well as western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. So for most of the UK, Friday is a cloudy day. There'll be outbreaks of rain and drizzle as well. But into the weekend, those outbreaks of rain will start to sink south and introduce milder air across the board.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, behind the ever-opaque veil of bureaucracy, we're slowly being sucked back into the EU's orbit. The government plans to make Westminster once again the vassal of Brussels. Farmers, the hardest working and most undervalued people in society, have fought back against inheritance tax plans in a John Deere-fuelled tractor parade in London. The lovebirds fall out as Labour and the unions wrestle over an inflation-busting pay package for civil servants, teachers and medics. Who funds these excessive handouts? You, the taxpayer. Plus, I'll be joined by the Shadow Lord Chancellor, Robert Jenrick, as Labour admits prisons could still run out of space despite £10 billion plans to build 14,000 more jail spaces. That is to say, £714,000 per extra space in jail. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most forthright panel, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sam Francis.
Very good evening to you from the newsroom. The top story tonight. Well, after years of what prosecutors called horrific abuse, 3 members of Sarah Sharif's family have been found guilty over her death today. Her father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother, Bainash Batul, were convicted of murder, while her uncle, Faisal Malik, was found guilty of allowing her death. Despite being known to social services since birth, the 10-year-old suffered unimaginable violence, including being beaten with a cricket bat and burned with boiling water. The convictions have sparked calls for urgent reform in child protection, with the Children's Commissioner warning of profound weaknesses in the system. Sentencing for the trio has been set for next Tuesday. Well, the Detective Chief Inspector of the case, Craig Emerson, said it has shocked and horrified people around the world.
Sarah's young life was brought to an end as a result of the brutal abuse and unspeakable violence inflicted on her by Sharif, Batul, which Malik did nothing to prevent.
Thousands of farmers have been driving tractors to Westminster today, demanding the government rethinks plans to impose an inheritance tax on farms worth over £1 million. Chancellor Rachel Reeves insists most farmers won't be affected, but critics say the changes threaten livelihoods, heritage and food security. Earlier, protesters held a minute's silence for farmers lost to stress and financial pressures. Calls for a pause and consultation are now growing louder, but Downing Street says the policy won't change.
This is the death of farming that's going to happen under this government. So we want to mark that, but once we get to Parliament, you give them what for. We're here to make a noise. This is a war, we will win, and the government will do a U-turn. That is determined by all of us to push that.
A neo-Nazi extremist's terror plot to intimidate migrants at a London law firm was thwarted thanks to the bravery of a receptionist. Cavan Medlock from Harrow appeared at Kingston Crown Court today after attempting to attack a solicitor in September 2020. Footage shows Medlock arriving with a 6-inch knife before being tackled in a violent struggle. Despite his threats, including admitting he was there to kill, Medlock was disarmed by the receptionist and detained by staff. He's due to be sentenced tomorrow. Police are investigating dozens of individuals at the post office and Fujitsu following the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. A team of 100 officers is reviewing 1.5 million documents related to the scandal as they consider charges including perjury and perverting the course of justice. So far, just 3 people have been questioned, with plans to interview many more in 2025. Commander Stephen Clayman, leading the investigation, has described the scale as unprecedented and stressed the investigation will take time, with trials possibly not happening until 2027. The Health Secretary has announced a permanent ban today on puberty blockers for children under the age of 18, pointing to safety concerns from independent experts. The ban applies to all UK prescriptions, including private ones, and will be reviewed in 2027. The move, though, has sparked criticism, with some calling it discriminatory. But Baroness Cass, who led a review into children's gender care, says the drugs are powerful with unproven benefits and significant risks. And FIFA's decision to award Saudi Arabia the 2034 World Cup has sparked backlash from politicians who have condemned it as sports washing. Despite significant concerns over human rights, including the treatment of migrant workers and LGBTQ+ fans, FIFA and the Football Association have given their support, following assurances from Saudi officials. Well, the move solidifies Saudi Arabia's ambitions to be a global sports leader, but critics, including Amnesty and Football Supporters Europe, have called today's decision scandalous. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in an hour.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Once again, Labour is in the process of doing exactly what it said it would not do, reversing Brexit by stealth, a grandmother's footsteps of return. Quietly, behind the scenes, there is a push to bring us into alignment with the EU. Labour would not dare to take us explicitly back into the EU, but it's doing so via the back door. A bill has been noiselessly making its way through the House of Lords that will give Labour carte blanche to make the United Kingdom into a miniature European Union. Part of why we voted to leave the European Union was to free ourselves from its stifling regulatory standards. The EU's economy used to be larger than the United States, but in recent years it has shrunk comparatively. You may ask why. Well, it's because of over-regulation and high energy prices. This bill will give Labour ministers the power by order to align UK regulations with the EU via a process known as secondary legislation. This has limited parliamentary scrutiny compared to an Act of Parliament. Clause 1(2) of the Metrology Bill explicitly allows that the Secretary of State may also, by regulations, make provisions in relation to the marketing or use of products in the United Kingdom which corresponds or is similar to a provision of relevant EU law for the purpose of reducing or mitigating the environmental impact of products. So Dyson Hoovers will be out the window. It's only EU law that may be aligned with. It's not a policy of mutual recognition of other mature regulators on the basis that a product that is safe in Australia or Japan, for example, would also be safe here. It is a specific effort to copy and be in cahoots with the failing European Union. Now, this sounds a footling bit of legislation with an obscure name that's introduced in the House of Lords because it's not that important, a subject purely for the nerds. But remember, the route for EU law to overtake UK law during our membership was merely Section 2(2) of the European Communities Act 1972. A few words in legislation is all it takes to subject a nation. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm delighted now to be joined by, among other things, the former Europe Minister for Tony Blair, Jeff Hoon. Jeff, thank you for coming back to join us. It does seem to me that with a number of these things, the government is cozying up to Europe and is paving the way for accepting EU regulations. And the Metrology Bill seems to be the easiest way for them to do it.
Well, first of all, I think the word metrology is not well understood by people. It's obviously about weights and measures in the first place. And there is, I think, an interesting historical comparison here, because one of the key demands of the French revolutionaries was a standardized system of weights and measures. And the reason for that was because at the time, local dukes and lords would simply set the standard for themselves. One of the consequences of that was obviously that some people were cheated, but equally it also meant that the French could not trade across different parts of the country, because one duke in one part of the country set one standard and a different duke in a different part of France set another. And therefore, it is important to have standardization. It is important to have an arrangement for British business whereby they can trade consistently and confidently right across the European Union.
But, Jeff, you know perfectly well that if we sell into the European Union, we have to follow their regulations. If we sell into the US, we have to follow their regulations. But this is about domestic regulations, and it's not just metrology is part of it, the weights and measures is part of it, but it's also more general regulations and gives a wide power to the Secretary of State to set product standard regulations by secondary legislation and to align with the European Union. Why not say, if it's suitable, to align with US regulations, which are of a very acceptable standard?
Well, of course, they can be negotiated separately with the United States in a trade deal or in some similar way. This is essentially an agreement whereby we will align with the standards of the European Union. And bear in mind, the government, if I may say so, that you were part of, passed legislation giving effect to existing EU rules. What this legislation will allow is for a minister to bring us up to date in the event of there being changes in EU rules.
But that's like staying in the EU. This is dynamic alignment with all the difficulties that accepting EU rules created in the first place. The regulations that made our membership so onerous and so disliked by people. And it includes weights and measures, which again was a constant source of disagreement and agitation between the UK and the EU.
Well, many of those, if you'll forgive me, like yourself, Jacob, who advocated Brexit, argued at the time that this would liberate the British economy, that we would be able to have our own standards, our own arrangements. But the reality is that that simply has not happened. Successive Conservative governments have simply not passed any legislation that gives effect to separate standards and separate arrangements. And in those circumstances, business is crying out to have a standard arrangement that allows them to sell in the United Kingdom, but equally across their markets in Europe.
Well, what I was doing when I was actually responsible for this as Brexit Opportunities Minister was the retained EU law bill, which would have got rid of EU regulations, but we'd have continued with mutual recognition because I recognise that EU standards are not axiomatically dangerous. Likewise, the US, Australia, Japan doesn't have dangerous standards. And if you want really free trade, you recognise the standards of countries that have high quality, but you can then set your own regulations for your internal market, because whatever it is, 94% of the UK economy is not involved in trade.
Well, the reality, though, for that 6% that is involved in trade, they are desperate to see this kind of alignment. I caught the end of Nigel Farage's programme in which he said we need the voice of small business. Well, there is no better voice of small business in this country than the Chambers of Commerce. They say we need alignment. And in fact, they go further and say we actually need as much alignment as possible because they want to sell not only their products in the UK, they want to sell them on the continent as well.
But, Jeff, that's a different point. Any market we sell into, we have to meet the requirements of that market. If we sell to Outer Mongolia, we have to meet Outer Mongolian product requirements. That's a completely normal part of trade. Aligning the domestic market is just creating a cost and a burden for the domestic market, which may be completely unnecessary.
I think that's to misunderstand what actually happens if you are a small business trying to trade on the continent. If you follow the logic of your argument, what that will mean is I, as a business person here in the UK, will have to follow one set of standards for the UK and then a different set of standards if I want to sell exactly the same product on the continent. And that's why it's necessary to have alignment. That's exactly what the British Chamber of Commerce is saying.
Not if we're faintly intelligent about regulation, you don't have to do that. If we're faintly intelligent, you say that products that are safe can be sold in this country, and that if you're producing for the US market, Australian market, European market, and meet a standard that is broadly similar to the UK standard, that's fine. But you can also have a less bureaucratic approach than the EU, which is very much, as you know, a process-based standard rather than an outcome-based standard. And outcome-based standards are, by and large, much less bureaucratic.
Well, I agree with that. But the reality is we are outside the European Union. The European Union will be setting the standard, and we have a choice as to whether to follow it or not. And the demand of British business is that we should, in order to reduce their costs and make it easier for them to trade. And it seems to me a perfectly sensible decision that the government are taking. It actually builds on exactly what the Conservative government did when it enacted all existing EU legislation.
All right. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for joining me again. Look forward to seeing you in future. After the break, the messages from our sponsors, we'll be taking a look at the scenes from Whitehall today as thousands of farmers took to the streets to protest against Labour's brutal tax regime.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Cryptocurrency entrepreneur Justin Sun spent $6.2 million, £4.9 million, on a banana. Duct taped to a wall, a piece of art by artist Mauricio Catalan. Other artwork has recently caused controversy. A portrait of the British computer scientist Alan Turing by the world's first ultra-realistic robot artist, that is to say, ADAR, sold at auction for almost $1.1 million. Joining me now to talk about these latest hoo-has is art critic and mentor at the University of Arts London, Estelle Lovett. I have a feeling that in the case of the banana, it's quite a lot to do with the buyer. Now, you've researched the buyer a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Justin's son?
Yes, so he's a very wealthy cryptocurrency dealer. And of course, you know, everything now is AI and FTs, and it's the way that money's going, and it's very good publicity for him. So obviously, you know, he's not daft. But what makes this banana so unusual is, and it has, as you say, taken the art world by storm. It is the current spectacle, and what's amazing is that even during these very difficult times, the art market still manages to spend big on a significant fuss. Why has it created this fuss? Well, don't forget, the winning bid just happened in a matter of minutes. It took Justin Sun minutes to beat 6 other rivals, so they've all got mega bucks in their pocket. But you know, it's conceptual art at its best.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about the Brexit betrayal, and the mailmogs have come in. Lucia says EU regulations aren't a problem because the EU is due to collapse imminently anyway. That's a very good point. It seems quite likely at the moment too. And Alan says 2025 Brexit put on hold to resolve a recession fully costed by Starmer and Reeves. And Will, Jeff Hoon seemed to praise the French revolutionary standards. Let's standardise the calendar then. What's your birth date? Mine was 21 Fructidor CLX. Well, the only one, which I suppose is 160, the only one I know is Thermidor, which remains with lobster, which to my mind is not a particularly nice way of doing lobster. Anyway, that's slightly beside the point. Hundreds of tractors descended on Whitehall today, driving through central London slowly and blaring their horns to protest against Labour's inheritance tax plans. I can hear them clearly from my own house. Farmers travelled from across the country to the metropolis for the latest rally against Labour's so-called tractor tax, which will see farms with assets over £1 million lose their exemption to inheritance tax. According to the government, only slightly more than 25% of farmers would be hit by the new regulations. However, the NFU shockingly claims that the true number is closer to 2/3. Well, I'm joined now by Charles Godeby, dairy, beef and arable farmer in North Warwickshire. And Charles, you're on the farm at the moment, you're actively farming. What effect will the tractor tax have on you?
This is going to have an enormous effect on me. So I farm in partnership with 2 brothers and my 80-year-old father. And the advice we've been given, set by, you know, what the government policy was at the time, right up till now, is that the assets should be kept in hand by my father. And now to find out last minute that that's not going to be the case. He's 80 years old. We're not going to have time to, you know, gift this and have 7 years. You know, as much as I'd like to think we can, you know, we've got to be realistic. And so that's going to have a huge impact on us. Now, I looked at our 10-year average profits from farming, and per acre, it was around about £125 an acre. Now, if we take away the subsidies, the decoupled payments that we're receiving, that it's being removed more rapidly from next year, our profits are going to be down to about £60 an acre. If we were to be paying tax, inheritance tax, when my father passes, we're looking at around about £180 to £200 an acre every year for 10 years. It's just not viable. Food production here on this farm will no longer be possible.
And it gets even worse, doesn't it? Because although there are exemptions between man and wife, a lot of farms are family farms with brothers and sisters involved, and there's very little exemption for them, and that therefore family farms will inevitably be sold off.
And that's the situation we're in. So I lost my mother about 9 years ago, so all the assets are in my father's name. So realistically, we keep hearing this £3 million figure, but that I think the chances of winning the lottery are greater than getting that £3 million exemption. So I think realistically, you're looking at nearer to about 1.3 million.
And 1.3 million is not an economic farm. That's the other part, that the farmers who are successful at the moment have consolidated, have built up businesses, are often doing other things around the farm, so the business exemption is important too. And with 1.3 million, they simply won't be able to keep going.
No, absolutely not. And interestingly, I did a Freedom of Information to the Treasury a few weeks ago. I actually got that back on Friday. And I have it in black and white from the Treasury that actually they've got no figures whatsoever for business property relief on farms or farmers. They have no idea how much was claimed, so what impact that would be. And if you add that to the information that came out in the last couple of days, that the agricultural property relief figures that the government use, if you look at the guidelines when making a claim for APR in the inheritance tax relief forms, they tell you to use the accountancy figures, which are vastly below the Red Book valuation figures that would be used now.
Right, well, Charles, thank you very much, and good luck with your farming. Let's hope this changes. Well, with me now is Diarmaid McColgan, founder of Concept Dairy, as well as my panel, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Donlab. Thank you very much for coming in. Tell me about Concept Dairy.
So, Concept Dairy, we're a platform that brings transparency to dairy farmers and show them how much their milk is worth into the future and allows them to lock in those prices. And over the past while, we've been working with farmers all over England, Ireland, and really helping them with that price transparency and helping them get paid above minimum wage, number one, and then getting them paid above the cost of production, which is a huge, huge issue for a lot of farmers.
Because what Charles was saying was that if this tax comes in, they're making £125 an acre at the moment. It'll go down to £60 without some of the subsidies. But they face nearly £200 a year of tax. This is going to be impossible for all dairy farmers. So it'll be taxed on their cattle as well, which is another part of the asset of the farm.
Oh, there's huge. So we've had 440 dairy farmers leave the sector last year. So we've had, every 3 days, we've had 4 dairy farmers leave. It's a huge, huge problem in the industry. Nobody's talking about it. I visited a really lovely dairy farm in South West Wales last week, and they're hanging on by their fingernails without this inheritance tax. And this is the final straw.
The final straw. And you were at the protest earlier on today.
Yes.
The noise was phenomenal.
It was. But the support from the public was phenomenal. Absolutely. The public is so much behind the farmers, which is great to see, even though they're inconvenienced in a lot of ways. But the support was really, really good.
It was very strong. And it is a broader problem because every family business, whether it's farming or it's a bakery, whatever it does, it's going to be hit by this if it has any serious assets.
Oh, of course, and it's a massive consideration. It's not just for farming, as you said, it's for small family businesses. We're a small tech startup. It has all the various implications that it has for us from a tax perspective, then employing staff and everything else. It's huge. This budget has been catastrophic for small business.
And Tess, let me bring you on this, because it seems to me this isn't, from the Labour Party's point of view, about farming or about business. It's rank socialism, that they just want to destroy the ownership of property.
Do you know,
I thought about that, and I knew that was the idea that you were going to come with. And part of me, because I was explained before that I came from that, heritage of my father working for a big laird, a big Highland estate, and thinking, yeah, bash the laird. But actually, I don't think it is about rank socialism, to quote you back at yourself. I think it's about, and this is going to actually appall you more, it's about environmental zealousness. And I would look towards the likes of Ed Miliband and recognising that if we're going to hit our net zeros, one of the biggest contributors and a harder one to hit is agriculture and food production, accounting for about 21% of our greenhouse gases. If you look at flooding, if you look at the lack of biodiversity, if you look at the ways in which the land has historically been farmed, I believe that the Labour Party want to get their hands on that. And the way they're doing it is taxing the traditional farming model, but saying, look what we bring you, £5 billion worth of tidbits if you buy into our sustainable projects. So therefore, they want to take with one hand and give with the other, and with the giving comes control.
So, John, it's either one mad scheme or another. It's either that they have this potty green agenda, which is making us cold and poor, or it's that they don't believe in land ownership.
Oh, there's a bit of both in it, I think, obviously. But this is a crying shame. And these are very important family businesses. And as you say, Jake, it goes much wider than the farms, but the farms probably at the brunt of this. They're being clobbered on trying to make any money out of employing people and doing their normal work by a big increase in national insurance. And then at the same time, they have hanging over them that any time the ownership of the family farm needs to change for retirement or for a death in the family, there's a huge tax, which means that you cannot keep that business going, that you have a big tax bill, which means breaking it up or losing it altogether. And we see people, as we're hearing, leaving this crucial industry. People want their milk, they want their butter, they want their beef products. They would like them to be British grown, and they're not allowed to because this government wants to smash them.
I bring Dermot back on because that seems to be a very important point, that the people who are going to buy this land aren't going to be farmers. They're going to be builders, house builders, or they're going to be people who want the countryside for fun. That means we will produce less food domestically, which I know you're strongly against. You want domestic production. So from Tessa's green argument, all we'll do is shift our emissions abroad. We won't make any difference to total emissions.
This is a great point. In Northwest Europe, England and Ireland, we've got one of the most efficient agricultural production systems. And what we see is, so let's say a UK cow produces between 7,000 and 8,000 litres a season. In India, that cow produces between 2,000 and 3,000 litres a season. Sub-Saharan Africa is 400 litres a season. So this is, we're going to be potentially importing products in from other third countries. There's probably going to be a trade agreement with India coming up now. That potential, India is the largest dairy producer in the world.
I want to come in here and say I don't believe in those environmental policies, and I think this is where Labour Party has always been out of step with the rural environment and industry, because we have the finest husbandry in the world, actually better than the EU in this country. And what we should be doing is recognising, yes, the consumption of meat will inexorably fall globally, but we should lead the market for the best reared meat that's available on the planet and export it to high-end restaurants and hotels across the world. We should be protecting our livestock.
Let me go in here, because I was in Costco last week and I was looking at beef, sirloin steak, and I saw Australian beef for £20.99 a kilo and UK beef for £25.99. So we're already been undercut on the shelves with beef, sirloin beef in Costco. And the problem is, it's not Costco, it's economic models. But the consumer is unaware, because all that beef ends up going into the restaurant trade, into the bar trade, where you don't really see the origin of the beef. Whereas the supermarkets, it's on the sticker on the shelf, the consumer sees it. And that's one of the big issues that we're having here. And it could be high quality beef, but exporting beef to other countries, but we're going to have pressure coming in from a potential trade deal with Brazil coming in.
But finally, no matter how much you squeak, they're not going to change their mind, because if they give in to the farmers, they'll have to give in to the teachers, to the doctors, to the civil servants.
They'll do that anyway. They always give in.
And all this imported meat, of course, then comes with a lot more marine diesel being burned, and so there's actually more CO2 as a result of this ridiculous policy.
All right.
We'll have to eat top food.
Unfortunately, we will have to move on. But thank you to Dermot and to my panel. In a moment, Labour has fallen out with its union paymasters. I'll tell you why shortly. Plus, Sir Keir Starmer has called for civil service reform. I wonder where he thought of that.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The next 24 hours will be rather gloomy for most of us, with a lot of low cloud, mist and fog, some patchy drizzle too, but clear and frosty for some, most notably those areas that have seen sunshine during the last 24 hours. Scotland, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, where we'll see clear spells continuing overnight. Frost widely forming under those clear skies and some patches of fog. But eastern Scotland and the far north and west, mostly cloudy. Likewise for Northern Ireland, England and Wales. And in fact, across the east of England, increasingly low cloud will lead to a gloomy start to Thursday, with largely drizzly rain starting to move in from the North Sea, and that will reach parts of the Midlands by dawn, and it's going to be dreary and damp in these areas. Southwest England, similar conditions, but for the west and north of Wales, perhaps some brightness coming through. Likewise for the far north of Northern Ireland, but otherwise Northern Ireland's mostly cloudy. The cloud beginning to spill into southern Scotland as well, but elsewhere across Scotland, where we do have the clear skies overnight, it's going to be a chilly start to the day, and in some spots, once again, temperatures will struggle above zero throughout daylight hours. Some patchy fog persisting in places as well, but the gloomiest skies, I suspect, by now will be across much of England into East Wales as well, with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. 8 to 10 Celsius in the south, a little milder compared with the recent days, but staying cold for parts of Scotland. Now, by Friday morning, the low cloud in the south and east will be spilling its way into southern Scotland as well as western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. So for most of the UK, Friday is a cloudy day. There'll be outbreaks of rain and drizzle as well. But into the weekend, those outbreaks of rain will start to sink south and introduce milder air across the board.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe. Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about the farmers and the mailmogs have come in. Dave wants to address the elephant in the room. Labour knows exactly what it's doing with this pernicious tax. It's to force as many farms as possible to sell up so the land can be made available for large corporations to build solar farms or for carbon capture. The money raised is inconsequential. Labour will waste it in the blink of an eye. And Wally says, Jacob, how much money went into London coffers today with the ULEZ charge from those tractors, which may have to have paid the ULEZ charge? That's a brilliant, genius point. I think they should get a refund. Unions. Other unions are threatening to strike over an offer of 2.8% pay rise by the government for teachers, civil servants and medics. The offer, which is above inflation by 0.2%, has riled Labour's union paymasters and comes after Red Rachel caved in to unions and provided a 22% public sector pay rise in the summer, coupled with their insistence upon working from home and their recent attempts to justify a 4-day week. We risk returning to 1970-style politics, with unions crippling the government and the country's ability to get on and work. This is what Red Rachel sets up for by splashing the cash in July. Well, I'm joined now by my brilliant panel, former Conservative Cabinet Ministers John Redwood and the historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop. John, we've seen all this before, haven't we? Labour governments give in to one part of the public sector and, like Oliver, they come back for more.
It's desperately sad to watch, and they've now discovered the problem that we were advertising for many months and you were seeking to tackle. The complete collapse in productivity in public services since 2019, so that there's probably a 20 billion plus black hole because it costs that much more to deliver the same services. They've recruited an awful lot of extra people. They're not delivering more service. A lot of the people aren't facing the public in the way you need in order to provide the service to them. So they've got to grapple with this, but they don't know how to. And we've seen this pathetic idea this week that a few tech executives will be injected in on 6-month or 12-month contracts and somehow will wave a magic wand and solve all these problems. No, it won't, Prime Minister. It's your job, Prime Minister, as leader of the government and with your Civil Service Minister, Pat McFadden, to provide the energy, the direction and the clarity that the civil service is going to need to carry out your wishes and to fulfil your aims. And at the moment, we're getting nowhere. We're going backwards, extremely expensive, a lot of wasted public spending.
And Tessa, there can't be pay rises without productivity increases or actually getting productivity to where it ought to be. But Labour's on a sticky wicket because it gave the train drivers a whopping pay increase without asking for any improvement in working practices or productivity.
Well, I think there was a level of naivety at the beginning of their governmental tenure where they thought we're going to solve the strike problem by just dishing out the cash and hoping that people will therefore shut up and put up and work harder. And I think they've learnt the hard way. However, I think they could be more creative about the way in which they approach this. They can't possibly cave in to something that's more than above inflation, aside from the 0.2% that this deal offers, if they're not going to throw a bit of red meat, forgive the pun, to the farmers. So I think what they've got to say is, for example, although this pay rise isn't the equivalent of what is expected in the private sector. The private sector pay is expected to go up by 4% vis-a-vis public sector 2.8%. What they could look at is, say, for example, you know, young people don't always want the really generous pension allowance that's given to them as a teacher or a policeman. And they could say that we'll remunerate you if you don't take up that pension offer in those early years. So they could look at a more flexi model of paying, I think, their public sector workers.
But there's no way they're going to reform the public sector pensions, which are costing billions.
Yes, and that's another very big part of this problem. But it all comes down to having too many people in the wrong jobs and not applying themselves to the
We're going to move on to our second subject.
task.
But I had a plan to get rid of 100,000 civil servants. There we go. I wasn't quite as ambitious as Mr Musk. The government has urged disruptors to join the civil service in a call reminiscent of appeals made by Dominic Cummings. Now that Labour's in charge, it can't be seen to decide if civil service is good or bad. Now, your friend Sir Keir, the Reverend Starmer...
I love the fact he's my bosom buddy.
He went and made this speech saying the civil service was useless, and then the next day he wrote a letter saying, I love you, really. He can't make his mind up about anything, can he?
Well, actually, I think he just recognised that what he'd inherited from the Conservative administration was this bruised, inefficient body that he referred to as a tepid bath of managed decline. That was your legacy. He effectively was handing that to you on a plate.
Well, that's my sort of language, not my legacy. It's what we were dealing with.
No, but the truth is you didn't solve it either.
Well,
so
we had a plan to get rid of 100,000 civil servants, reduce it, and have
let's be honest, in 14 years of government, you didn't manage to achieve that,
Actually,
Jacob.
Francis Maude did a phenomenal job in reducing the civil service. It then increased because of COVID, and Boris had an absolute plan, which I was working on for him, to get the numbers back down. So we'd done it once, then for a good and valid reason it went up, and there was a plan to do it again. Admittedly, that wasn't followed through by Rishi, but by that time I wasn't in government.
And in terms of the language that's being used by Pat McFadden versus the language that was used by Dominic Cummings, Pat McFadden wants innovators and disruptors. I consider myself one of those, whereas Dominic Cummings wanted weirdos and misfits. So, in fact, the language is appropriate, and I'm happy to volunteer myself. And apparently...
As you're not a weirdo or a misfit.
I'm an innovator and a disruptor.
But Starmer is in a terrible muddle, isn't he? That he's dependent on union money, he offended them, and now he's saying they're all marvellous. He can't make up which way is up.
No, you're exactly right, that he is very conflicted on all of that. But here is a man taking on a really difficult job in control of this enormous bureaucracy, suddenly realising that the bureaucracy that he thought were his friends are going to stop him delivering his key aims for the British people. He's going to prevent the growth strategy. He's going to prevent the houses being built, all the things that he rightly wants to do. And he's now in a panic. And he really needs some good counselling from people who run big organisations before to say you've got to pause, you've got to work with the people you've got. But as you say, natural wastage should be applied from today. We shouldn't be replacing anybody from outside. We should replace in the crucial posts from inside to give people promotion prospects. And then you start to get 6-7% at least reduction in your costs each year. And then you can start talking to people about the kind of incentive packages that
that's
would be normal in the private sector.
That's absolutely right. In about 3 years, you've got rid of about 20% of the civil service just through natural wastage. It's a very good way of doing it and relatively painless.
Yeah, I'm interested that you're focusing exclusively really on the civil service, when I think actually one of their bigger issues is the ballooning NHS and their failure to address social care. Civil service arguably is a bit thin end of the wedge. I mean, depending on your definition of what a civil servant is.
Well, I'm including admin in the health service, which is a very big area, and you're right.
But if the nurses go on strike for only 2.8%, and the doctors got a huge pay increase, the nurses will have popular sympathy. They will find it very hard to hold the line.
But I'm talking about administrators.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And we've got a very big administrative cadre which has expanded massively over COVID, and not all of those should still be needed.
If I was the Labour Party looking down the lens, because there will be more strikes, I would pick off my favoured sectors, and I would pick off nurses and remunerate them better, because and likewise teachers. Female sectors always been historically underpaid, and they have to be coal-facing.
And that's the problem. Everyone is a special case, a worthy case, and then you've run out of money.
Well, you give something for something. That's what you
need. Productivity.
Productivity is the answer.
Teachers and nurses have to look at your foot. They have to teach your child.
Productivity in the health service has gone down. Anyway, thank you to my panel. After the break, I'll be speaking to the former Cabinet Minister Robert Jenrick and Shadow Lord Chancellor about Labour's plan to spend £714,000 of your money on a new prison space.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Last orders at the bar, and I'm joined by Geordie Shore star Ricky Guanaccio. Have I said that right? Is that Italian?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
is Italian. Your parents Italian? Is it?
Pronunciation was pretty much perfect.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So look, mate. Yeah, Geordie Shore. I never watched it, mate. Yeah. So I do apologise about that. But I know these reality TV shows are making big stars out of the people, making you famous, making you loads of money. Is it worth it?
For me personally, yeah. It's been a hell of a career. Been a hell of a lot of fun doing it. Ups and downs, but first and foremost, money-wise, yeah.
That's good. So people stopping in the street, you being famous, wanting the autograph and all. How did you cope with that, Ricky?
Well, when we first started doing the show, I mean, we got our show off the back of Jersey Shore in America. We never expected the fame that we got, and, you know, being one of the biggest reality TV shows in the UK and now the world, you know, it's in 150-odd countries worldwide. Wow. It's pretty crazy. It's when you're living in houses. I mean, for example, Geordie Shore and Love Island's probably the same as well. When you're living in villas and you're living in houses, the arguing side sort of plays on your mind. You've got to deal with all that. You know, it's a hard place to be. It's a pressure cooker.
You're living in one of these villas, Ricky, or one of these houses. Do you ever wake up one morning and think, "What am I doing here?"
When I first started, yes. Yeah. Now, I love it.
Yeah?
I don't mind all the, you know, there's no emotion connecting me now with filming. It's kind of like I go in there, it's fun, or it's, you know, it's dramatic, whatever it may be.
Have you ever worked behind a bar?
No.
No?
Yeah, for not a long period of time. My mum and dad had a...
Well, I can
definitely mess this one up.
Yeah, I can actually believe that you've never worked behind a bar.
Yeah, so my parents sacked us when I worked in the restaurant.
Well, obviously, I mean, you wouldn't get a job here with a pint like that, would you?
Do you want it?
No, mate, no.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about prisons, and we're not about to talk about prisons, we were talking about the unions and productivity and pay rises. And the mail mogs have come in. Jane says public sector pay rises should be linked to productivity. Low productivity equals no pay rise. That's a very good point. And Ben says, and I so agree with Ben, I haven't sent this in under a pseudonym, I assure you, well, it would be a good thing to get the civil servants in the office before they start disrupting. Yes, get people into work. So after thousands of prisoners were released onto the streets earlier this year, further blows to the justice system have been announced, despite the billions being spent to create 14,000 more prison spaces at £714,000 per cell. The Justice Secretary has admitted that room will run out within 3 years. This has been compounded by the government's admission that alternative forms of punishment are being employed. Rather than durance vile, virtual prisons are being proposed with GPS tags to monitor prisoners. It's the same old story with Labour, soft on crime, soft on the causes of crime. Well, I'm joined now by the Shadow Lord Chancellor, Robert Jenrick. Robert, thank you very much for coming in.
Good evening, Jacob.
Isn't the unpleasant truth that you and I have to face is that we were both ministers in Tory administrations that failed to build the prisons, but were very keen on locking people up, and this is why we've got the problem?
Yeah, I think that's right, Jacob. I mean, in fairness, the last Conservative government did build more prison places than prior Labour government, but not enough. We set out to build a series of prisons, and as the Labour Justice Secretary has said, they're going to be delivered over the course of the next few years. But we need to build more. The other thing we need to do, Jacob, is get the 10,500 foreign criminals who are in our prisons out of our country. That is the easiest way in which we can get capacity in those prisons to quell the current problem and to be able to lock up more dangerous people who are currently on the streets.
And two thoughts on our record further. One is we made a terrible mistake of selling off old prisons, thinking the money would come to build new ones, before we'd got the new ones. So we reduced places by selling off places like Shepton Mallet, which I think sits empty, without having the new places ready. And that was sort of administratively incompetent.
Yeah, I think this was poorly handled by the Ministry of Justice. They set out to do a prison building programme, as you say, which involved getting rid of some of the old prisons, some of which were Victorian and decrepit and in need of removal and regeneration for housing and other things, and then to build these new prisons. But it's got bogged down, as ever, as infrastructure projects do, whether it's roads, railways or housing in this country, through a combination of poor delivery by the civil service. The British state just doesn't seem to be able to build anything these days. Complaints from local people, which we all understand. I've been a constituency MP, you have as well. But this is in the national interest. We've got to be able to lock up dangerous people. That means we have to be able to build prisons and build them at pace. So I support any changes to the planning system that will enable us to get these prisons built.
But the other thing is that we should have got rid of the foreign criminals. Why on earth didn't we do that?
I think it's two things. One is that we just haven't used all the levers of government in the most robust way. We should be saying to a foreign country, take back your criminals. And if you're not willing to do that, why would you get foreign aid? Why can you have full access to our visa system? We have more leverage as a country than I think sometimes we think. And then secondly, it is this network of human rights laws, like the European Convention on Human Rights, that gets in the way and makes it immensely difficult because criminals concoct absurd claims like because they've now got kids in this country, they have a right to a family life, they couldn't possibly be sent back to their home country, even if they're a murderer or a paedophile or a terrorist. And that is just outrageous, and the British public won't accept it.
And we gained the right, once we left the EU, to send back European prisoners who didn't have a right, unless it was a national security risk, to stay here anymore. We didn't do that. So it's just the weakness. It's so frustrating. We look back at our last period in office, we were weak, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, you and I, on a number of topics, criminal justice, immigration, there are others, I think agree that the last Conservative government just wasn't Conservative enough, it wasn't robust enough on these issues. Nonetheless, this Labour government is proving to be very supine and weak. They're now 5 months into office, and what have they done on this subject? Well, they're proposing to continue with the prison building programme that we were. We need to, in fact, be building more prisons. They're not making significant progress on getting these foreign criminals out of our prisons, out of our country. They're not even doing simple things like getting the courts to sit for longer hours. The Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr, who runs the system, has said that the courts have capacity for 6,500 extra hours. And so cases, very important things like rape and sexual offences, are now being listed for 2027, 2028, when just if you ran the system more efficiently, forget about spending billions on more prisons, just run our existing courts more efficiently, we could do that.
And very dangerously, there's a different subject. They're talking about removing the right to jury trial, which I think is an absolutely terrible idea. But
well, I don't support that. And I remember when you and I were in Cabinet during COVID, Boris and others all agreed that we were not going to do that. It was an ancient liberty of this country.
Yes.
We were going to protect it. So I don't think that is the answer to this problem.
But with this prison building programme, there are bits of it, I think, that deserve support. I think it's right that they should be made projects of national significance and that the planning decision should be reduced to 16 weeks. I think, actually, Angela Rayner, whisper this quietly to my GBNews viewers, is one of the people in the government who's actually doing things. And this is the right thing to be doing. But the cost, how can it be £714,000 per cell when you can build a hotel for much less than that per room? I mean, Claridge's may cost that much per room, but an ordinary hotel wouldn't. You could build several houses for £714,000, each one of them with half a dozen rooms. How does it cost this much?
Yeah, look, I'm as staggered as you are by those costs. You know, this must be gold-plating how we build our prisons in this country. It is more expensive than in many other countries. In parts of the United States, for example, they're using modular prisons. So you go and build prisons in factories, in concrete. You then bring them to a location, build them, frankly, also much faster than we are building them, because this programme has taken years. We've got to be building prisons at pace. It's also wrapped up in the fact this is a heavily unionised industry. There are lots of domestic laws which constrain the types of prisons, how they're run, the facilities. Look, someone has got to cut through this Gordian knot and enable us just to build prisons faster and have more people out of
Because it's
prison.
not just a little bit more than it ought to be. It's 10 times more than it ought to be. If it was £70,000 per cell, you'd think that sounded about right, just as a finger in the air figure. 714,000 is just crazy.
No, I agree. You know, we have more people in prison in our country than in many other developed countries. But I actually advocate building more prisons, locking up more people, because overall crime has fallen in recent years. But there are some categories of crime, particularly those that are demeaned sometimes by the authorities as being low-level crimes, the things that affect all of us in our daily lives, robberies, burglaries, theft, having your mobile phone nicked. If you're a prolific offender, someone who has been convicted many times for these sorts of offences, you should be in jail.
Do we lock up the right people? A lot of people with mental health conditions, a lot of people who are drug addicted. Aren't the prisons getting too many people in them?
Well, I think there is an argument about those with mental health conditions, and in some other countries they find alternative ways of keeping those people off the street and trying to rehabilitate them. I don't think our prisons are well run. I mean, if you visit prisons, you can see that there is flagrant corruption, there is drug and alcohol abuse which is not being properly treated, there's radicalisation by Islamist groups in our prisons, there's poor education. So there's a lot of work to be done. But I do think we should be putting more people behind bars, particularly career criminals.
Thank you very much indeed. Up next, Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, I was at the farmer protest as Keir Starmer, the so-called farmer harmer, gets it with both barrels. I'm also going to be talking about the fact that we appear to be paying millions of pounds in interpreters for foreign nationals who we've let stay here, who are also on benefits, by the way. If you can't speak English, really, should we be paying your benefits? I'm not sure we should. And there is a school now in Tower Hamlets that's asking children to essentially starve themselves to show solidarity with people in Gaza. Has the world gone mad? Yes, it is. And a TV exclusive with a couple that found a legal migrant in their boot and then were attacked by a load of other illegal migrants. Stay tuned.
Oh, very interesting. If you need translation, you should use ChatGPT. It's absolutely remarkable. Anyway, that's all after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I am, in case you'd forgotten, Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and you want to know the weather report in Somerset. Well, tomorrow, even though it's the middle of December, the sun will be out. It will be almost Caribbean-style weather tomorrow.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsored sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. The next 24 hours will be rather gloomy for most of us, with a lot of low cloud, mist and fog, some patchy drizzle too, but clear and frosty for some, most notably those areas that have seen sunshine during the last 24 hours. Scotland, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, where we'll see clear spells continuing overnight. Frost widely forming under those clear skies and some patches of fog. But eastern Scotland and the far north and west, mostly cloudy. Likewise for Northern Ireland, England and Wales. And in fact, across the east of England, increasingly low cloud will lead to a gloomy start to Thursday, with largely drizzly rain starting to move in from the North Sea, and that will reach parts of the Midlands by dawn, and it's going to be dreary and damp in these areas. Southwest England, similar conditions, but for the west and north of Wales, perhaps some brightness coming through. Likewise for the far north of Northern Ireland, but otherwise Northern Ireland's mostly cloudy. The cloud beginning to spill into southern Scotland as well. But elsewhere across Scotland, where we do have the clear skies overnight, it's going to be a chilly start to the day, and in some spots, once again, temperatures will struggle above zero throughout daylight hours. Some patchy fog persisting in places as well. But the gloomiest skies, I suspect, by now will be across much of England into East Wales as well, with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. 8 to 10 Celsius in the south, a little milder compared with the recent days, but staying cold for parts of Scotland. Now, by Friday morning, the low cloud in the south and east will be spilling its way into southern Scotland as well as western Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. So for most of the UK, Friday is a cloudy day.